North Korea, a small country that resurfaced from the bloodbath that the United States caused, burning everything that moved last century, a people that has in its collective memory the horror of the blind war of a blind power, and that has confronted a strategy to avoid a new war. The United States, that has done whatever it wanted in this peninsula, suddenly turned its hostile rhetoric, and in less than 2 years, there have been 2 meetings in Singapore and Hanoi. Some are frustrated because in the second meeting there has been nothing put on paper, and others consider that new opportunities will come without clear risk of a nuclear war. This is one of the hot spots of the region. Let's review events and characters. U.S. North Korea is our critical move today. On February 27-28, U.S. President Donald Trump, the supreme leader of the Democratic Republic of Korea, held in Hanoi its second historic summit 8 months after the first one in Singapore. This meeting ended 2 hours before what was planned, and could have had a high symbolic value for peace. Nothing was concluded on the possibility of diplomatic missions, no conclusion to end the war in Korea, which is a conflict still without resolution almost 63 years after hostilities. At the end of the summit, White House spokeswoman Sarah Sanders said that in order to take away tensions, no agreement was reached, but the teams hope to meet future meetings. Let's add other statements that contribute updated data. In essence, they wanted us to raise sanctions in full, and we cannot do that. They were willing to denuclearize portions that we wanted to, but we couldn't accept all sanctions. So we'll continue working and see what happens. But I was forced to withdraw because of that. Our main position will remain invariable, and our proposal will never change, even if the United States proposes negotiations in the future. Even if we made an unprecedented proposal to denuclearize our conflicts in Yom, the United States said it was difficult to raise sanctions. Our president felt it was impossible to continue negotiations. Both North Korea and the United States expressed their positive will of keeping contact and continued dialogue. China applauds this. Achieve denuclearization and long-lasting peace in the Korean Republic is the general expectation of the international community. In general, after the joint effort of all the parties, the great will to resolve the problem of the peninsula politically through dialogue was clear. Well, North Korea, after the partition of the peninsula in two, is in the half north, above parallel 38. Let's look at its geographic location. Popular Democratic Republic of Korea, sovereign country in Eastern Asia, is placed in Korea Peninsula. To the north it has China, northeast Russia, west Yellow Sea and Bay of Korea, to the east the Sea of Japan, and South Korea. Pyongyang is the largest city and capital. The country has 120,000 square kilometers and 25 million inhabitants. The highest point is the peak Baekdu mountain. Korean Empire ruled the peninsula. Japan colonized after the war with Russia in 1905. In 1945, 1945, the peninsula was divided in north and south, occupied by the USSR and the South by the United States. In 1948, two independent states were created. In 1950, both faced each other in the War of Korea, and it is known as the Korean War. For many, the first armed confrontation of the Cold War. It never signed a peace agreement, but an armistice in 1953. Constitutionally, it's defined as self-sufficient socialist state, Republic Hoche, which means a production of state property. Basic services are subventioned or financed by the state, has good military and nuclear development. The member of UN non-gonal and G77. As of the government of Kim Jong-il, it sped up its nuclear program and is known for its nuclear tests. Let's go to Russian agency Sputnik under the following title. United States refuses to raise sanctions to North Korea without a full verified denuclearization program. Fox News showed Trump saying that they wanted to denuclearize a part. I do not want to abandon sanctions unless we see an authentic program, and Kim was not willing to accept those conditions. It was not a good time to sign an agreement. Pyongyang made it clear that at this time it's only willing to dismantle one part of Domayon that does not include key aspects, according to Washington, and asked the United States and the United Nations to lift all sanctions. I will now go to telesurtv.net under the following title. Between missiles and imperial prepotence, the relations between the United States and North Korea, U.S. government, through the Department of Treasury, imposed an economic blockade to Korea that keeps it from importing products, services, and technology. Through the Wassenaar arrangement signed with other 31 countries in 1996, it provides prohibitions to exportation of any technology or double-use material. On August 6, 1917, after the U.S. Congress unanimously vetoed blocking North Korea, The Guardian wrote in its editorial, "Our opinion about sanctions are an essential tool," and declared this as a rare success of diplomacy. This was what they defined as United States move. We all know that in order to satanize this, a ferocious campaign has been unleashed where they call North Korea a totalitarian dictatorship. For you to have more elements, we recommend this article published in rebellion.org, written by Felicia Albunot, a writer of global research for many years. Is North Korea the aggressive country? The author reflects that according to the 3-year War of Korea that did not end in a peace agreement, for which they continue in war with the intervention of the United States, willing to annihilate countries with few population, let's think recently in Afghanistan, Iraq, or Libya, it's not strange that they say that have heavy weapons. North Korea has 25 million inhabitants in 120,000 square kilometers. The United States has 323 million in 9 million square kilometers. It is calculated that since 1945, the United States has manufactured 70,000 nuclear weapons. Is it realistic to believe that North Korea is a threat? I close our recommendation that is published in rebellion.org and is a replica of what was originally published in Global Research. We now connect with Jorge Gestosa from Washington. Thank you very much. Going back, I have returned to Washington after the summit in Vietnam, where President Donald Trump brought a failure, something he disliked, because the summit with the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un was that a setback on what he attempted to be an advance in relations to achieve denuclearization of North Korea. And the end of that summit in Hanoi was sudden, when they reached the conclusion that there was no more field in common. Donald Trump said that his demands was that denuclearization had to take place at any rate, and North Korean president said that before that, sanctions should be fully lifted. And Trump refused to do this by saying that this was doing too much for too little. On the other hand, according to Donald Trump's advisors, what happened is that he was advised not to go to the summit or not to organize the summit because he would not offer anything. So for analysts, what happened was simply a show, a circus that Trump made in Hanoi, knowing that no results would come out of that. And this is why he did not commit to a third summit. Analysts understand that everything he wanted to was to distract attention from very serious internal problems like the explosive testimony yesterday or on Wednesday made by his personal lawyer, former personal lawyer for 10 years, Michael Cohen, who said that Trump was a racist, a liar, a forger who had committed crimes that are being investigated now by the Intelligence Committee of the House of Representatives. This Adam Schiff was saying that this testimony, Cohen's testimony, helped them to investigate Trump. Trump returned from Vietnam thus with nothing, or more than nothing, a failure and domestic problems that are completely serious and that could even lead to an impeachment as happened to Richard Nixon. Thank you, Jorge. As of this data and the title we have on our critical move today, we will ask our guest what could be the consequences of this abrupt conclusion without agreement of the Hanoi summit. What is more convenient for Donald Trump, who wants to run for president again? North Korea, the United States, geopolitical consequences of a non-agreement. In an article published in Counterpoint, we read that in 64 years after the Korean War ended, the governments of the United States have made everything possible to punish and make the communist countries suffer with hunger has blocked it from market, has sanctioned it severely, and has surrounded it with missiles and military bases. Let's go to history and see some of the constant aggressions of the White House and dangerous military attacks, many times in complicity with South Korea. In 1968, a troop of 83 soldiers of the United States were intercepted in Korean waters. In 1994, after being at the fringe of the war, former President Jimmy Carter traveled to the peninsula with the authorization of Bill Clinton for an agreement that was signed 3 months later. In that agreement, the Asian country agreed to dismantle its military program in exchange for the construction of civilian infrastructure. The White House did not fill its word. In 1992, George Bush declared that North Korea allegedly threatened national security. In 2006, the Security Council decreed an embargo of weapons and prohibit export and import from North technology. In 2009, that embargo was expanded to financial transactions. In 2013, two air bombarders with nuclear capacity launched projectiles in front of the Korean Sea. Pyongyang considered this as the beginning of the war. In March, Korea announced a state of war. Later, the U.S. deployed its Navy in the peninsula. These are unreasonable steps that have reached a serious state. We are ready to respond in any way, said North Korean Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Months later, in August, the United States and North Korea made many land, air, and sea maneuvers with thousands of soldiers. Even if it had more than 50, the United States has more than 15 in South Korea with massive destruction weapons and on the border of North Korea. The approach made by Kim Jong-un with North Korea and that led them to organize the games in 2018 softened the road for Trump, although he threatened to eliminate North Korea from the map. I will now go to an article of Global Research called Know the Facts. North Korea lost 30% of its production. This was written in 2010 by Michel Josodowski. According to declarations of Air Force General Courtney May during the Korean War, during 3 years we annihilated 20% of the population. 78 cities and thousands of towns were destroyed. Now they believe that the population lost almost 1/3, from 8 to 9 million people during the 37 months of hot war, an unprecedented mortality rate. Neither the United States, UK, China, or France in the Second World War did not reach 2%. A good comparison to understand, Douglas MacArthur appeared in Congress in 1995 and declared that he had never seen a devastation of the kind. Nevertheless, they called Kim Jong-un like a psychopath who loves to play with its country's arsenal. That is history that determines the rest of the arenas, social, political, geopolitical arenas. We will add analysis from the United States. We have James Yuli, member of the Political Studies Institute of Washington, D.C. Welcome, James. I would like to ask you, the media does not stay short in the names against North Korea. Trump was very optimistic, saying that the best was the friendship and kindness. Can we call this a failure? No, I think we must have a broader perspective. even if no specific agreement of denuclearization was performed with North Korea, we must not undervalue the progress of both summits. First, giving priority to diplomacy above war rhetoric between both countries is a very important achievement to lower tensions on possible military confrontations. Not only the United States and North Korea, but North Korea and South Korea, including Japan and possibly China. So this is an achievement to lower tensions and raise a process or advance a process of diplomacy. Second, the temporary succession of nuclear tests in North Korea is also an achievement. I think that North Koreans are playing a long-term game, as many of the experts say, in the political and economic arena, which is to place its country within the standard protocols of negotiation about their nuclear capacity. I think that they are ready to reduce some components of their nuclear arsenal, but not in full. And North Koreans have showed for decades that they are very smart adversaries, and they have rejected all attempts to dismantle their arsenal. They also understand the crisis inside the United States and President Donald Trump. He understands that he is very weak in his negotiating position because both sides of Congress and inside his party and the Democratic Party do not want to dismantle the military bases or withdraw soldiers from military bases in South Korea. So I think that North Koreans are advancing in their strategy of placing themselves within the protocols of nations and possibly in a future reduce its nuclear arsenal, but not in full, and in order to be accepted within the community of small countries with nuclear capacity. But once again, I must emphasize that the diplomatic process is a great advance in progress above the war rhetoric of possible military encounters. After so many hostilities in words and actions, not only by President Trump, why this sudden turn? And I will also like to ask if the U.S. industrial military complex agrees with this approach of President Trump. Or are there some contradictions? Well, there are contradictions always with immediate challenges and policies, but in a long term, the military industry of the United States wants to remain with the military bases around the world for two reasons. One, it's a commercial industrial complex to produce weapons of different kinds for allied countries is of their interest, and also the long-term attempt of the United States to position itself for possible future conflicts, for example, with China, that is the most powerful country that is arriving to the World Bank, and in the next 25 years will be the most important power, not only in Asian geopolitics, but the world's geopolitics. At this time, we are examining this meeting or this conflict in Venezuela, for example, where China and Russia actually have an objective alliance to be expanded with powers, and that they refuse to follow the U.S. neoliberal politics. So this is also a context we must examine on the U.S. military-industrial plant that wants to stay with the conflict, at least soft conflict with North Korea, and keep its military bases and exercises. In the case of Trump, with all domestic problems he has, what is more convenient for him for the elections in 2020? War or peace? Surely we hope we will follow a road of peace. And it depends on several things, especially the movements of civilians inside the United States, throughout the ideological political spectrum that want to place diplomacy above the war rhetorics, and also mobilizations of civilians in other countries around the world, including parliaments of several countries that also want to support a process of dialogue and not war. I think that at this time, the crisis inside Venezuela and the threats of the United States and other countries of Europe and left-wing governments in Latin America are an example that has generated demonstrations around the world, citizens against war, in support of dialogue, and also most governments around the world support the non-military intervention and also support a process of dialogue and respect through peace. This is an example we can also set in relation to North Korea in tensions with the United States, or actually the tensions of the United States towards North Korea. It's very important to say that interaction between North Korea and South Korea has improved. South Korean President Moon wrote an economic program with North Korea to establish, for example, railroad and road networks. He wants to follow this road and not the road of conflicts that some in the United States want. But at this time, I think that we are stopping the possibility of war between North Korea and the United States, or a military conflict between both Koreas and Japan. James, I have an article published by an Argentinian media, Página 12, the title "The War is Melting," written by Julian Barsaski. In the end, he wrote the following: "A constant in the media has been always to reduce the price and ridiculize Kim Jong-un, whom his friend Trump has called chubby suicide. By the time it results in a smart friend, Kim, launches rockets almost 70 years after the aggressive policy of the United States, perhaps one of the most aggressive of Republicans. The Republican rhetoric has made anything to impose this anti-Korea speech, also satanizing North Korea, although after the Second World War it has not been aggressive to almost anybody. I think this is an important variable. How definitive is this for the resolution and the cost it has had? It's always important to tell that the history of the empire of any Republican or democratic government in the United States aims fundamentally to keep hegemony of capitalism and its neoliberal expression with a huge and aggressive weapon of military weapons In history, it has been the only country in the world to launch a nuclear bomb against another country. Inside the short-time game, negotiation, diplomacy, to establish a much more peaceful negotiation to advance his fundamental goals. That is the objective. It is not, the goal is not to allow North Korea exist as a self-determining socialist country. We must always remember, in the case of Venezuela, the case of Cuba, Nicaragua, North Korea, the final aim is to crumble down ideological orientations in these countries. But in the short term, we need to establish a front of negotiation and not permit a military confrontation conducted by the United States. This is the context in which Kim Il-jong in North Korea is operating to re-enter the standard space of the protocols of nation to resolve conflicts through negotiation without impositions like the United States would like. Interesting. What we understand is the letter that, in your opinion, or the card that is being played in North Korea, in your opinion. Thank you very much for your reflections and considerations.
James. Bueno, preciso.
We will now advance to another point. Perhaps the core is in the peace of the entire peninsula. Is this convenient for the United States? And something our first guest, James Early, talked about. What does the position of Russia and China determine, which are part of the neighbors? We will analyze this after the pause.
Our actions have an impact on the environment. It's our responsibility to change for the sake of our planet. Let's be part of this transition. Watch, preserve, and protect your green zone. Wednesdays, only on Telesur.
We are back with our critical move, whose title is North Korea, the United States, Geopolitical Consequences of a Non-Agreement, and according to what happened in this historic summit between President Trump and North Korean President Kim Jong-un. Its geographic location turns North Korea in a key nation in the geopolitical board. Peace with South Korea would be definitive and will leave the United States disarmed of arguments it has used to attack it. If peace is achieved in the peninsula, the United States will have less arguments to justify the presence of almost 20,000 troops. In a possible war, North Korea would be key because it has China and Russia as neighbors, and that helps the peace in the region. President Xi Jinping has deepened the bond not only with North Korea but with South Korea. In 2018, to relax tensions, Chinese President called South Korean President Moon Jae-in, who used its nuclear power to compel the United States to sit with the Asian country. Before the meeting in Singapore, Kim Jong-un had bilateral meetings with China. By up to 2017, North Korea made 6 nuclear tests with short, long, and long-term missiles scope. Its weapons could be similar to twice the power of the atomic bomb sent by the United States in the Second World War. After the launchings in September 2017 that caused even seismic movements. We have as our guest Dr. Ángel Rafael Tortoledo Leal, professor in the National University Rómulo Gallegos, international analyst. Thank you very much. I would like to ask you what I asked James to start. Is it a risk that the second summit between Kim and Trump ended without an agreement? I think that the only risk we have there is for Donald Trump's interest that went around the world, or is going around the world, trying to dilute the amount of conflicts that he created, especially when he fights against Russia or China, Korea, Venezuela. It seems that the U.S. foreign policy was based in sustained aggression the last 4 years that has not given any positive result, not to the U.S. economy or corporate interests of the U.S. establishment. This is what Democrats are claiming in Congress. Since Congress accuses Trump to be searching for disputes around nations and also to attack the free market, which is a paradox in the sense that when he opposes a tax to U.S. traders because they trade with China, or they tell car manufacturers not to purchase pieces to China, otherwise they will be punished with taxes. So this is international policy of Trump, and we could talk about Korea, Middle East, any country in conflict or where he has caused conflict, will first attempt against U.S. interests that with the Democrat mandate of Bill Clinton and later Barack Obama had softened the entrance of the U.S. citizens in many territories that was very poorly seen after the failure in Iraq, in Syria, Yemen, Libya, and negotiations with Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia. It would seem that the board got complex with the arrival of Donald Trump. It's not only Venezuela. Now, what is North Korea? It is the result of the Cold War. It's a tangible result when the peoples marry their needs to overcome them, and Korea has done it. You can agree or disagree with the political system, but the truth is that that system takes 3 meals to the people in North Korea, a country in peace that paradoxically is very well armed in the nuclear aspect, that's true, but it seems that for the United States and Donald Trump's policy, when peace is the core, war becomes business. Just to raise contractors, which is another history that happened in Iraq and all these Middle East countries. In China, they didn't advance because I was very close to Syria in 2012, and we saw the U.S. policy that is still advancing. So the continued war in North Korea will mean for the world an assault to democratic countries. How can we call about democracy when I'm interfering against the peace and the planet? the nation that produces the largest amount of nuclear weapons in the world. The United States has more nuclear arsenals than any nation in the world. So we have to doubt, because the media say today, they show the pictures that were broadly circulated, that Trump is very optimistic after the second summit. Our best asset is friendship. But the media say that is not enough, because they didn't even reach any agreement. Well, from the diplomatic point of view, yesterday there was an advance in diplomatic terms, because it's the countries expressed their disagreement, and a disagreement is a starting point for any negotiation. There is no negotiation if they're not opposed parties. It seems strange, but North Korea maintains its proposal to denuclearize part of North Korea. They are entitled to keep weapons, but in exchange to lifting sanctions, because we're talking about the 50s, and we have suffered in Venezuela in these last 3 years. The U.S. sanctions can feel what being sanctioned by the United States means. We're talking about being subjected to very, very strong pressures. Trump does not dare to raise sanctions because he needs it. That is U.S. policy. That is the policy of 250 years of the United States with the world. Keep tension in the zone under the pretext of conflict with Korea, but to keep in alert the military bases of South Korea and the other bases in the zone, because Japan also has an important part there, and other countries, Malaysia, Burma, Indonesia. All these countries around the zone. Why? Because they have China there. So the correlation would be South Korea, Japan, United States against China, Russia. This is what you said at the beginning. They have to contain a possible reaction of China that, by the way, plays peace in this game. China is not threatening or attacking anyone. It has a conflict with Taiwan, but that is an internal conflict, as with Hong Kong. But China is playing as a huge trader that feeds the demand of energy it has, but through negotiation, peaceful negotiations with the countries. In our case, I think China is a great ally, and it's a win-win relation with Venezuela. North Korea is also an ally of Venezuela. We were reviewing news and found some interesting things. For example, North Korea congratulated President Maduro after the elections, and some months later in December, the president of the Popular Assembly visited Caracas and met with President Maduro and Mr. Arreaza. We also have relations with China. We have excellent relations both with North Korea and South Korea. So diplomatic relations doesn't have to do with enemy relations between other nations. After the multipolarity, interculturality, respect to self-determination, we go around the world establishing diplomatic relations. And we must tell the people, diplomatic relations must never be absolute. They are good political relations, strategic relations, and this doesn't mean have it together, but one. In any case, the important thing is our relation around the world. We are in front of a country that, as us, are resisting an empire that pretends to hegemonize and has done it during the 20th century as the great supremacist of the world. where you can see the position of the UK versus some attacks it's also received in the European Union as well. It is detaching to this purpose of domain of Trump. It's not that Trump is crazy or is a clown. It is absolutely designed and thought to cause the reaction he is causing, including internal damages. In the multipolar design, understood as Commander Chavez repeated so many times, the existence of several power poles in respect to sovereignty and self-determination, what role does North Korea have? North Korea will play a role that it's doing right now, going to peace with a nation that is a sister nation that was broken after the Second World War, and that in the 21st century has no sense. And this could cause problems with the United States and governments, whether Republican or Democrat, because we're talking about political power, self-sustainable with some interesting internal policies, but also technological power, like South Korea. Let's not forget that great brands, electronic brands around the world come from South Korea. And we're talking about power in the Navy industry, development of communications, very important topics. So regarding the future, this new generation, North Korean president said it during its meeting with South Korea, that both Koreas could become a geopolitical axis that is very important for the zone and the world, where Korea appears as very high levels of life, regardless that it is called pigs or ugly or whatever names he is called, that is ridiculizes the person who pronounces them more than who they are addressed to. So we're talking about international political commitment. Regarding this article we quoted before, written by Mike Whitney, published in Counterpoint, the problem is Washington and not Korea. The relations with the North can be normalized, economic bonds can be strengthened, trust can be reestablished, and nuclear threat can be deactivated. The situation with the North does not need to be a crisis. It can be arranged with leaders that want peace and not war. That is multipolarity. Respect each condition, internal condition of each country. The fact that you have a specific capacity, in this case we're talking about nuclear capacity, they can end the world. Yes, but we also have Israel, that is a very small country also, and it's a very aggressive country. North Korea just defended itself in the 50s. It has not attacked, not that we know. They're not looking for a country to attack. They have rather encapsulated themselves and increased the development levels. He is called, they want to reduce the impact of a country, whether you like Korean socialism or not. That is a problem of the Koreans, but what is true is that Korea feeds 24 million people, and this goes against the U.S. hegemonic mandate. It's not easy. We have lived 20 years of Bolivarian revolution. Each time the Security Council meets, the forces that oppose there are really strong. It is not easy for the United States or any of the the governments lower or increase volume in the relations of the country. So we need a healthy balance that Commander Chavez talked with the multipolarity. We see our foreign policy looking at the future at a world in perfect balance, regardless of the forces of each country. In parallel, it would be interesting to see the codes of language. You must know it as a journalist. Language codes. We're talking about when we listen to some journalists, unfortunately very poor intellectually, they can say that 50 countries, 58 class countries around the world. Yeah, you can divide countries like that. That classification was made by those who are closest to their employer. So it would seem that there are countries that are not countries. All countries have all the rights and are included in the Concert of Nations. When we have to think that there are 140 countries that are disagree or abstain, refrain from their opinion. Inside the United Nations. You said this afternoon that you congratulated North Korea, United States, Trump. Yes, the truth is that from the diplomatic point of view, it's successful. And what Donald Trump came to seek, the force of its government, it seems that he cannot give account in the parliament. I think he has problems with Mr. Cohen. Cohen just declared things that called him many things, and this is not the behavior desired for a president. Perhaps his mental condition is not favorable to his position, but Mr. Cohen has revealed very important things. And the Donald Trump we're looking at now, we will see how he will be reduced. Yesterday, I have no problem in saying that yesterday peace and Korea won with its firm position. If you don't lift sanctions, I have nothing to do in these negotiations. Thank you very much, Professor.
Hasta pronto. Le esperamos nuevamente en una jugada. Bueno, pasemos a nuestras conclusiones.
Let's go to our conclusions.
Fueron muy abarcadoras las reflexiones de
The reflections of our guests were very important. We quote a report of the U.S. journalist Blake Hardin, who says that, among other things, during the Korean War, the United States launched more bombs in North Korea than what they launched in the Second World War in the Pacific. This included 32,000 tons of napalm launched against military and civilian targets and devastated the country more than necessary to finish the war. The condition of a victim, a country victim for more than 50 years, have forced North Korea to develop heavy industry and command nuclear technology. Although no agreement was reached in this last summit, we must not underestimate both summits and diplomatic progress that have taken place in those places. North Koreans, according to James Early, is playing a long-term game to enter in international protocol games, work on their arsenal to have an international acceptance, while it resists the hegemony that sanctions aggressively. Will a peace agenda come through, or will the U.S. agenda win? We end this critical moon. Thank you very much for being here.